Okay, 2021 was a great year on YouTube, but what did I ride? Easily the best park was Carowinds, which I should have visited in 2015 so that I could ride both Thunder Road and Fury 325. Back then, I guess I didn't have the patience for that long drive. At over 9 hours, it set a record for my coaster trips, and I knew these distances were something to get used to. In this case, it was definitely worth it, even though girl number 4 stayed home and I had to pay for the fast lane. Starting with Intimidator, I sat with another enthusiast who I would run into twice more that day. Afterburn became my favorite invert for the next year, while Copperhead Strike greatly exceeded my expectations. I don't even care how weak those launches are. Of course, we all know what made the biggest impact. In the station, the reactions of the GP in the train behind me indicated just how mind-boggling Fury 325 would be. I had never felt such speed in my life, and after that treble clef, my score was already a 10. Today, this Giga Coaster takes the bronze medal in my top 10. Overall, this trip would have been perfect if not for the drive home when girl number 4 broke up with me. Not a pleasant thing to hear when you have 7 hours left on the road. Despite some hardships in the next few weeks, I did get some relief in the form of a single rail coaster. Yep, the long-awaited Jersey Devil coaster was ready for action on June 14th, and I wasted no time. After all, my home park was getting its first noteworthy coaster since El Toro, so naturally I felt 15 years younger. On opening day, I showed up bright and early, rushed over to the west side of the park, and the coaster was not running. No matter, I took the day off from work in case I had to stick around. Obviously, it's easy to stay busy in a place like that, but I eventually got bored enough to ride Green Lantern. Going up the lift hill, I looked to my left, and that was my first time seeing the Devil up and running. Truly a beautiful sight. You should have seen me running like a maniac across the park. I might have endangered the lives of others.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Of course, there was already a line, although it was probably half the wait from 15 years earlier. Towards the end, everyone was singing along to Party in the USA, and in that moment, it was probably the happiest line I'd ever seen. Then there was the coaster. There was a lot to love about it, but I knew something wasn't right about the second half. In the days ahead, everyone was complaining about that brake run. The following month, Hollywood Studios asked other YouTubers for their thoughts on the new coaster, so I sent him a soundbite. I think this part sums it all up. RMC bunny hills without airtime are like mushy bananas. You really try to enjoy them, yet you know something is off. Fortunately, the park made the necessary adjustments, and now you do get airtime on the bunny hills. It is the worst RMC I've been on, but it's crazy how I still prefer it to King Naka. My last relationship started late that month, and if you think this sounds like a rebound, it probably was. Sadly, for the time being, I had to sever all ties with girl number 4, and girl number 5 came along only a few days later. So it was a pretty seamless transition. Once we were a couple, she was immediately invited to my Cedar Point trip the following month. To kill 2 birds with 1 stone, we spent the first night in Erie for a quick visit to Waldameer, another one of those classic independent parks. We were treated to some romantic views of Lake Erie, but this was also where I found out number 5 did not like pendulums or spinning rides. We got every credit since the crowds were manageable, although Ravine Flyer 2 had quite a line. On the way to the park, I was really hyping up that coaster, and it certainly delivered despite some roughness. It was also the first of 3 coaster magnets in my collection. After another 3 hours on the road, it was time to get to the point. Driving up the peninsula towards those colossal thrill machines, there's just nothing like it. This would be a notable visit on a few different levels. First of all, there were 4 credits waiting for me, 2 of which are considered world-class. My first wing coaster, Gatekeeper, was a pretty good warm-up, while I surprisingly preferred Valraven to Griffin back at Busch Gardens. But the first winner that day was Maverick. Not a whole lot to say, since it met my high expectations, although the launch was a nice surprise for girl number 5. I knew all about Steel Vengeance as well, except I didn't want it to be my favorite coaster, since that's such a common choice in the coaster community. Well, we got our backseat ride, and it was bonkers. During the course, I completely forgot about conformity and lost myself in a sea of airtime. The rest of the day, I gave it a lot of thought and decided this was my new favorite coaster. I think the inversions are what gave it the edge over El Toro for me. That day, something else worth noting was our ride on Wicked Twister. We did not think anything of it. It was just a simple but fun coaster that happened to be near Gatekeeper. Little did we know that it was on the chopping block, and when we found out it would meet the scrapyard, we were pretty torn up. I sure picked the right year to visit Cedar Point in lieu of Dollywood. However, the important takeaway from that entire trip was that I finally had a girl who I could call my coaster buddy. I would decide on a park, and she would always trust my judgment. Not to mention, hearing all the videos I watched gave her a decent understanding of coaster lingo, like B&M, RMC, Gigacoasters, Airtime, and credits. Eventually, she even picked out her top 5, which, unsurprisingly, were all coasters she rode with me. However, in 2021, there were still some more parks I visited alone. In early September, I finally made it to Darien Lake, a nice place for the locals to visit, but nothing too special. I will say Ride of Steel was fun in a bad way, since I'd basically ridden it, while Predator was bad in a fun way, since I laughed at how awkwardly it tracked. Meanwhile, Mind Eraser and Tantrum were closed, almost causing me to throw a tantrum of my own. The next day, Seabreeze fortunately made up for this. It's basically Waldemere on Lake Ontario, although none of its coasters compare to Ravine Flyer 2. Jackrabbit is nothing crazy, but it uses the terrain well, and it's always nice to ride a centenarian roller coaster. Don't miss the bobsleds either, because there's really nothing like it. Finally, I treated myself to some birthday credits the next month. The destination was Idlewild, but I did check out a mountain coaster along the way, even though the line tested my patience. As for the park, it's just fine for younger guests, especially because they're not the ones paying $45 a ticket. Rolo Coaster was pretty fun for its size, even though the trains have elephant ears. Easily the best part of the visit was the ride-op at the Flying Scooters, who happened to be an enthusiast, so he understood my frustration about the Wild Mouse being closed. After a year of successful YouTube poops, I thought about branching out a little bit. I have heard some people say that the YouTube coaster community has become oversaturated, so I wondered if there was anything new to contribute. The historian in me wanted to talk about wood coasters, and I also noticed there were exactly 10 relocated American ones. Bingo, a top 10 video. Increasingly, I also noticed Australian coasters getting some attention, and it sounded like another list might be necessary. Although 2 people beat me to it, their videos were a few years old and only showed POVs of the coasters, so I got to work on something better. It ended up being my most popular video outside of the YouTube Poop series, and yet I wanted to go a step further. I always knew the defunct Golden Nugget Mine Ride had been a popular one, but it took me this long to realize nobody wanted to discuss it, not even the channel National Coasters. I did quite a bit of research, and a lot of time went into this video, which I think is apparent. Acting as a sort of tribute to my home state, this is easily my favorite of the 3 informative videos on my channel. Now, as it turns out, I saved the best for last. 2022 was when I went coaster crazy. I picked up 56 credits, exactly the same as the previous year, but this time there was more to discuss. As 2021 came to a close, I knew it was about time for a Kings Island trip. So my girl and I worked hard and waited out the New Jersey winter. Over time, I slowly revealed what was in store for us, and we eventually settled on Orion as the most anticipated coaster. We set our sights on mid-April, but family commitments caused a 2-week delay. To make matters worse, we were so eager to go that I forgot the Beast would not be open. We would have had to wait another week to get that very important credit. Aside from that, the trip was a major success, and most of the credits were easy pickings, thanks to the fast lane. Banshee is currently my favorite invert, especially with that drop, and our whole ride was glass smooth. But what about Orion? Well, I love everything it has to offer, it just needs to offer a little more. That's why I give it a 9.5, although girl number 5 thought it was perfect. Meanwhile, I ended up preferring Mystic Timbers. Despite all our jokes about the shed, the theme itself, and all those little hills in the woods, make this my third favorite Woody. I can't fault the park for not opening the Beast, so my only real complaint was that number 5 refused to take re-rides on everything but Orion. This was especially annoying after we rode Diamondback. We were stuck with a middle row, and I knew we could get a much better ride. Clearly I have reasons to go back, although I will probably wait for Vortex's replacement. From here, I was off to the races, determined to show girl number 5 some of my favorite coasters. Between Six Flags America, King's Dominion, and Kennywood, she picked up a ton of credits, while I was happy to get on Batwing, Tumbili, and Steel Curtain. Of course, we also had to visit Busch Gardens, since Pantheon was brand new. In the trains behind us, enthusiasts and GP alike reacted with awe.
I said awe. A-W-E. That's better.
This is a world-class launch coaster with one of the most fascinating layouts I've ever experienced. Finally, Hershey Park was pretty much mandatory after they announced the closure of Wildcat. Although it was no longer my favorite at the park, I welcomed that brutally rough ride with open arms, and that glorious brake run was music to my ears. That year, I wondered if there was any coaster-related work I could do. Getting paid would be nice, but I was pretty sure volunteering was the way to start. That's why I joined the American Coaster Enthusiasts, which I had already done a long time ago, except all I did was read the magazines. This time, I wanted to get involved. After a Zoom session with the communications director, I was given a choice of 3 different coasters to write about for the ACE 360 column. I went with the Wildcat at Lake Compounce, since it was never running during my past visits, so now I had an excuse to try again. Plus, I was up to the challenge of making one of the most hated Woodies sound good. Third time was the charm, because I was finally able to ride it. The coaster is probably more tolerable if you know what you're getting into, but yeah, that's a pretty big if. Not even the single Airtime moment can save it. But to the coaster's credit, it looks great and adds a lot to the park's midway. Let's not forget that it was pretty large for its time, back when upstop wheels were still a new thing. In the following weeks, I slowly put together the article, making sure not to bore people with stats or opinions. In the end, both the director and I were happy with my work, except it took quite a while to get posted, and since then, I've had no way to tell how many people have read it. Still, I hope they'll let me write again this year, because this stuff would definitely look good on a resume. In late August, I was having rocky relations with girl number 5, so we decided to spend a few days apart. This devil went down to Georgia to cross a major park off his bucket list, and it was one hell of a drive. My longest ever, in fact. After all that distance, I was fascinated not just by the southern accent, but also by the interesting smells. Maybe they just prefer different air fresheners and perfumes down there. And then, of course, they have Six Flags Over Georgia, which had just the right amount of people that day. Short lines and a few lovely groups of sorority girls. Perfect. Unlike my visit to Six Flags St. Louis, I made sure to give the Batman clone a try, since this is supposedly the most intense one out there. Blue Hawk is a nice piece of New Jersey history, originally operating in Wildwood. Disappointments included the recently watered-down Mindbender and the Great American Scream Machine, which apparently lost much of its airtime after the retracking. As for the good stuff, Goliath quickly became my favorite B&M hypercoaster, offering the most powerful airtime and positive Gs for this model. For Twisted Cyclone, I set my expectations just right, cutting it some slack for the short length and making the most out of the airtime. While the Joker Funhouse coaster was closed, and I was too early for the upcoming Pescetti Bowl coaster. I left the park very satisfied, especially since I could leave when I was ready. As a bonus, I even stopped at Adventure Park USA on the way home, and one of the ride ops knew I was an enthusiast when he noticed I was without kids. Despite our best efforts, including plans to visit Canada's Wonderland, my relationship with girl number 5 took a turn for the worse the following month. Of course I was grateful to have her as a coaster buddy, but even I know there's more to being a girlfriend than that. Less than a week after our disappointing trip to Wildwood, I decided to bail out, and we never saw each other in person again. Surely this was harder for her, but that doesn't mean it was easy for me. Unable to continue paying for the apartment, I was once again stuck with my parents, where I currently write these words. After plenty of turmoil, I decided to go on the Canada trip alone, making this the first time I left the country specifically for coasters. The 5G on my phone did not work up there, so I was a little anxious having to drive around that way. Luckily, I made it to the hotel without much hassle, and the next morning I was introduced to the miracle that is breakfast poutine. Frankly, that was all the local cuisine I needed. Noticing rain in the forecast, I was a bit apprehensive about my visit to the park, but right away I noticed Leviathan was running, so that was all I needed. That's because it was time to get my 300th credit, and a 300-foot coaster was the perfect choice. But unlike many enthusiasts, I actually preferred the oodles of floater airtime on Behemoth, despite all the raindrops hitting my face. Other highlights included my new favorite dive coaster, new favorite suspended coaster, a crappy wood coaster, and a surprisingly decent wood coaster. The rain did get pretty heavy, forcing me to take a break from the coasters, but at least there was some sunshine in the last couple hours. While this place certainly has the quantity of coasters, I probably won't be back until RMC or GCI works their magic on one of the Woodies. At this point, I had made it to 3 big new parks for this exceptional coaster season. Around Thanksgiving, I noticed a lot of people on Facebook reflecting on where they'd been, as if the year was already over. Well, I was determined to show that it wasn't. In my mind, Six Flags Magic Mountain was the perfect way to end the year with a bang. But in the real world, this was just too stressful and expensive, so I considered my options this side of the Mississippi. Lo and behold, there was a major bucket list park open for the holidays, and surprisingly, it was not Holiday World. I found out on Facebook that Dollywood is not only open, but is especially busy for the holidays. Thus, the last trip in this 3-part series was on. A couple of weeks after my decision, I was having dinner with one of my twin friends, who was actually sitting with me when I caught the phone on El Toro. As we shared our holiday plans, I impulsively asked him if he wanted to join me for the trip, expecting him to be too busy. But then he looked at his calendar and noticed a perfect series of days off from work. A great trip just got better, and it was an added bonus when his brother decided to tag along. Together, they definitely made it easier on my pocketbook. The 10-hour drive was quite enjoyable thanks to the twins' positive attitude. Plus, it's always nice when people comment on my song selection. I noticed how one of them always takes a picture of each city he passes through. They are city boys, after all. And when we pulled into Pigeon Forge that night, they were getting some serious Las Vegas vibes. If only we had an extra day down there, we would have been all over that parkway for hours, especially if we had bikes. But the next day, we got right down to business after finishing at Waffle House. Sure enough, we got stuck in the Dollywood traffic, and even after we finally parked, the long walk to the gate was an adventure in itself. We were greeted by a bustling midway, so we knew we'd be at the park for a while, which did not bother us one bit. Just like Silver Dollar City, it's the kind of place where I don't care how long it takes to find a coaster. We intuitively took the clockwise route until we saw Thunderhead, where the line extended onto the midway. Soon, the coaster broke down, and several people left. It was a good thing we stuck around, because we ended up in the station where some guy was handing out time-saver passes as an apology. These were supposed to be valid 3 times, but the staff usually didn't scan them. By the time we used up the passes, we only had Blazing Fury left. Truly the coaster gods were smiling upon us that day. The twins really got a kick out of Mystery Mine, between the theming, inversions, and steep drop towards the end. Meanwhile, I preferred the more intense layout on Thunderhead, although the Golden Ticket Awards probably overrated a bit. Later on, I almost had an anxiety attack, because I wasn't sure if Lightning Rod was open. But seeing a train go up that last turn put my worries to rest. In the end, this became my coaster of the year, although it was really hard to tell if it was better than Pantheon. While we had no coaster-related complaints, the real problem was the cinnamon bread, in that it was much too popular. There was literally a bread line. Cold and hungry, we gave up on our little side quest to eat something more typical in a fraction of the time. This, along with the absence of family coaster credits, makes it very likely that I'll return within 5 years. After all, Dollywood has some of the nicest, most enthusiastic staff I've ever seen. Plus, we did not actually stay at the resort, and I could see myself enjoying that with a special lady friend. But for now, we have reached the end of nearly 25 years of my story. In the beginning, my coaster obsession had its roots with George, and it was a part of him that lived on when his body did not. While learning about coasters made for a good coping mechanism, maybe deep down I was also trying to stop the world from burying the last of him. I allowed the knowledge to grow at a rate that surprised the rest of my family, and before puberty even began, my appreciation of a coaster was a perfect balance of theory and thrills. But I always had trouble bringing people to that level, much less find someone who's reached it. That's why I stopped being an enthusiast for a while, and years later, it took a more robust online community to bring me back out of hiding. With my regular Facebook friends, my coaster-related posts are never that popular, and I'm sure it'll be the same when I share this video. But I foresee a new coaster phase with increasing reliance on air travel for my credits. If I ever ride something like Formula Rosa, Ride to Happiness, or Dododampa, I'll know exactly where to share my thoughts. Whether it's YouTube or Facebook, I always see my audience as potential friends. Maybe when my next phase begins, I'll get a lot better at building a network of these people. For all we know, I might find one terrific girl this way, and I won't have to teach her everything myself. But until I hit the road for Holiday World this spring, my place is behind this keyboard as I hopefully prepare new content for the community. All that remains now is to extend my deepest thanks to those who sat through all of these videos. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of this very important area of my life, and maybe you even want to ride some coasters now. I'll leave you to it. For now, this is Julian Dale, and I don't corkscrew around.
Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue. I'm Eric. Julian Dale has, in my opinion, the best roller coaster video in the world. Theme Park Avenue is pretty below average, and I think Coaster Studios could be replaced with something much better. Comment down below if you like Julian Dale, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more shit like this. I'll see you next time.
The biggest failure in the amusement industry.